Welcome to New Life Podcast. Today I get to talk with Pastor Garrett Stout, who is from Valdosta, Georgia. They've been here quite a few times. He's been on another podcast that we did here at the church. So I'm excited to talk to him today about youth and kids from anywhere from middle school, high school, maybe just out of high school. We'll see where we go today. Just how we can reach them. What he is seeing, and just maybe the blessings and the difficulties of being in youth ministry. So, Garrett, kind of just tell us who you are.
Yeah, well, I'm Garrett Stout. I'm a youth senior and whatever else pastor down at Redland Baptist Church. We're right on the Florida-Georgia line, and so that's where we're at. I've been married for September will be 8 years, and so. Not super long, not super short, but so I love my wife. She is right there with me in ministry. I currently have 3 kids, and I say currently, I'm also a foster parent, so that could change at any given time, and it usually does. Actually, last week I had 4 kids, and so now I'm down to 3, and things change, and so. But I have a 1-year-old. She just had a birthday. I've got a rambunctious 3-year-old, and then I've got a beautiful 14-year-old, and so just. Big gap, a lot of fun. And so, but pastor down there, and I don't know, I'd call myself a blue collar pastor. I've done plumbing, roofing, counseling.
You do what I do.
Yeah, real similar. I love getting to talk to you. It makes me feel a little more sane.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you're not the only one. Yeah, you're not the only one. So how long have you been doing youth ministry in Valdosta?
Yeah, been leading youth ministry for 11 years.
Okay.
A little more than 11 years.
Mm-hmm. So, I know you mentioned, I know this is a little bit off topic, but I am curious just because we have recently on the podcast our children's life house parents, foster parents. Just give me just really quick. I know it'd be hard to do this, but really quick, just what has it been like being a foster parent since you've been doing it?
Yeah. It's hard. It's great, and it's a calling. It really is. It's one of those that God calls you to it and He'll equip you to it. But it's kind of uncharted territory. No matter how long you do it, each child's different. Each child has their own story with different traumas and triggers, and so it's been tough. I know right now, actually, my 14-year-old we adopted. We started with foster care and then adopted her years ago, and so it's a blessing, but. In some degrees, it's like taking work home with you. And, as a youth pastor, most of the kids in our home have been youth age. That's where my heart's at. And but it's and I say that, and that almost sounds bad. But what I mean is I love what I do. And it's like getting to disciple every day. Yeah. And so it really is these opportunities to share the gospel and how it's lived out, but also share other scriptures' truths and how it's lived out. So it's hard, but it's rewarding, and it's good. And I say that it's, it sounds like easy words, but when you're following what God's called you to do, no matter how tough it is, there's a sense of peace in that. Yeah. No matter how wild and crazy it can get.
Oh, absolutely.
There has been some wild stories. Yeah. So
and I do agree. It's the same thing. Our parents here at New Life had said that it is a calling. Mm-hmm. It'd be very difficult to do like without a calling. Because it's exactly what you're saying. It's very much God is equipping you to do something very difficult and gives you peace through all those things. So before we jump into youth ministry, you are not just here. You're not here to teach our youth. You're here. You have a job and a mission. So you guys came here. This is your 4th or 5th time.
This is our 4th time in 5 years. Yeah. We missed last year, and it's my fault.
Yeah,
my wife,
all your fault.
She popped out a baby 2 weeks before I was supposed to come, and I just, I love her, and I was not going to leave her in that moment. So we just had to bail. We didn't have enough other chaperones that could manage it. So 4th time in 5 years.
Yeah. So we've gotten to know each other pretty well over the times that you guys have been here. Just share maybe some of the things that you guys are doing here on your week on the mission trip.
Yeah, this week we're getting to help with the kitchen ministry that you guys are doing. So we're getting to hopefully give some people some rest, and we get to step in and get the joy of doing that. But we've also We've brought Mr. Tony, so he's doing a little bit of electrical, and whatever else. We're moving washers and dryers down from some damp areas downstairs, kind of cleaning some of that up, and over at the Life Center, getting to haul lots of trash. So we get to fill some dumpsters up. It almost feels like a competition, and so kind of getting things moved there and getting it ready, and kind of as we clean it, get to see the vision of what that building's going to be and look like. So. Those are some of and there's a lot of in jobs, taking care of some floors, I don't know.
Some trim.
Yeah, trim, a door that wouldn't shut, just kind of things here and there. So, little stuff.
Fixing all the things that just fall apart all the time. Just button up a lot of things. And they definitely are getting, they probably wouldn't say it, but they're doing a lot of work over there at the Life Center, and it's they do it with a great attitude, all the kids, and
it's fun. Gotta have fun while you do it.
And it's great to make games out of it, and sometimes that's what you have to do to keep the kids moving and going. And,
we'll say it's because of the kids that make it fun.
I'm sure they're razzing you every second.
Oh, they keep me humble, that's for sure.
So tell those that are listening, what has it really been like over the 11 years that you've been doing youth ministry? Just how has your experience been teaching the youth in Valdosta?
Yeah, well, I think the fact that it's been over 11 years, I never would have expected it's changed as much as it would over over a decade. Things just change.
Yeah.
One, how quickly it changed from because I started 21, really started leading youth ministry. I'd always helped with it after I graduated, but I started leading already those couple years. How different it was when I was in high school, and so it's always changing. Every time you think you're about to get a beat on something, it's shifted, and it's always so subtle, and so. Part of it is just kind of knowing that it's not going to be the same. There's never a structure that'll always be good. And so for me, literally every 6 months, I got to just sit down and reevaluate what's working, what's not, where's the misses, kind of what conversations am I having more often than not anymore, and what conversations I've quit having as often because students don't need those. So it's been a lot of change. I never expected it changed that fast. It feels like culture just shifts so fast. I think another interesting thing about doing youth ministry this long is I became a parent about halfway through that journey. And so getting to parent, well, I'll say a little around halfway. I've been getting to parent for about 5 years now. And being a parent shifted some perspective as well. God's really humbled and made me more gracious about some things. And so that's given me some perspective, but it's also contextual. I kind of have gotten to, even though I've been at where I'm at currently for 6 years, a little over 6 years, man, church across the street that we do ministry with and partner, and man, I love them so much. They're dealing with a couple different things, and so man, pockets even within the same community, the context changes, and so those are the kind of things I've seen. I think so many times we're looking for a potion that works really well and kind of across the board, and we're all, I think as youth pastors, we're all kind of peeking over everyone else's shoulders like, what'd they do? That's a good idea, I'm gonna write that down. And so we tend to see like, oh, that looked cool, I'm gonna do that. And which is great, why reinvent the wheel? But I think it's always changing. That only works for so long, and man, next thing's coming.
So how many youth do you like? How's your structure a little bit like?
So mine's currently right now it ebbs and flows, but currently realistically we're probably at about 60-ish students that show up on our midweek activity, which is our really big youth service, and so we have about 60. And the way we structure it is different than a lot of people I've talked to, but we do a brief intro and then we go into small groups, and so we'll divide them up age and gender, and then we feed them. We work with a lot of kids that they might not get fed if we don't feed them, and work with a little bit, that kind of a little more impoverished community. But I say that we have kids from all walks of life, all colors, all attitudes, all kinds of places, and so it's real diverse. But so we'll eat and have a little bit of fellowship, but then we break into what I call them classes, and they'll be anywhere from driver's ed. I call it missional woodworking because whatever we build, a lot of times we'll go to our local organization called Called to Care, which help youth in crisis or youth in foster care. We have one. We just started an esports game, and so kids get to connect, which is interesting because you think video games don't do that, but instead of video gaming through a screen, we now are kind of getting back to some face-to-face, at least side-by-side, playing in the same room again, and so kind of going retro. So we've done things like that. There's a crochet class. Pickleball sport. We do a lot of sports classes. One thing I realized really quick, it doesn't sound super ministry-like, but some of these kids don't get to play sports in school because they got started late. Like my daughter, she wanted to play softball, and we were trying, and we're so far behind already at the time we got her, and so we found another sport that she really excelled in and was able to catch up. But some of these kids just don't get to play because they kind of missed that early years, and so now they're so far behind they don't get to play organized, and so this it lets them have that. And so classes, different classes accomplish different things depending on what some of those students need, but it allows us to also have almost like a small group part 2 and more relational discipleship, where as they're playing basketball and either the teacher's getting schooled or it's getting schooled, the middle schooler, kind of live out, okay, what does it look like for the gospel to live out in basketball, and have those teaching moments. Same with driver's ed, what does it look like, and so, and it sounds weird, and to some degree it's not always deep, and it doesn't always have to be, life-altering deep, but it's having a moment where an adult or two are with a smaller group of students and just get to have casual conversation. Yeah. What does it look like to live this gospel out that we talk about? And so that's kind of the structure that I have. It's an hour and a half. It's roughly 30 minutes each thing that we do. And so that's how I structure it. And, I moved away from a lot of large group time, as much as I love doing that, because I'd found that we just had so many students that struggled to stay attentive in that kind of setting. They spend all day in a classroom, and so this was like coming to another classroom to them. So they kind of get to break off into smaller groups and have more of a to and fro, and they get to kind of interact with the gospel and not just hear the gospel.
Yeah, so that's good. I've never heard any. So that really is interesting because I've never heard of anyone doing like these classes that you're talking about. And that's just really interesting to me because you're right. When you think about a lot of times, you're doing either a large group or even in small groups, you're talking about what you should be talking about. You're talking about the Bible and how to apply it to your life, but then you're really giving them an opportunity to actually live that out in certain different areas of their life in these classes and kind of just more just in the world. Giving them just more practical knowledge. But also, it's funny, Creston had said it even when he had kind of talked on Wednesday a little bit, this idea that you don't have to do this elaborate thing to be able to share the gospel, talk about just do it in your everyday life. When you're playing video games side by side or having fun doing this or in driver's ed or, something as simple, just Jesus should be overflowing in you enough that those around you are catching it. And I thought that was really good. And I think it does apply to exactly what you're doing there in Valdosta with the youth, with these classes. Because I do think that's really unique because I've never heard any other youth group do any. I've talked with some youth leaders that have very large youth ministries, and it just is a unique way of doing it.
And it takes more help, but I think that's which it kind of accomplishes another thing I love doing the youth is bridging that gap a little bit. I think for so long, youth programs were this thing that you had to create a youth program, and it almost starts creating an island to themselves, and which we don't want. And we start wondering why 9 out of 10 students when they graduate never come back to the church before they're 35. They're gone, and that's I'm gonna just tell you, doing it for 11 years, it's a solidly true statistic. Even in the Bible Belt South, that's where it's at. 8 or 9 students every, roughly 89% of my students, they'll quit going to church, right? Yeah. And so it also is a great way, a little sneaky way to get my adults and draw them in, right? They might not feel comfortable or able to lead a Bible study, but teaching a kid how to crochet, man, they're on it.
Yeah.
And they love Jesus. They love crocheting. Man, let's let passion and ministry meet. And
that's really good.
That's kind of where a lot of my classes come from. I just start asking, like, hey, got a hobby? Thought about helping with youth? And I suck them in.
Mm-hmm. Just like any ministry, there's always challenges that come about.
Mm-hmm.
And, not that one's more than the other, but kids come with challenges in their life. So what have been some of the challenges that you have faced in youth ministry?
Yeah, I think one of those is I think the island of itself. When I first started youth ministry, I had this idea of what it should be and, have an exciting thing. And it's supposed to be separate and different. That's why it's called a youth ministry. And I realized fairly quickly that was not creating a healthy long-term spiritual effect on students, that it was creating a flash in the pan, and then the real world would hit and it would disappear. They weren't connected to things. One of the actually leading indicator of whether or not a student is going to stay in the church or not past high school, and there's a lot of indicators, lots of helpful and great things, and I thought I'd ask you, you probably have a great answer, but it's students that were connected to two people in the church that were older than them, outside of their youth group. Yeah. And so if they were connected to at least two people within the church outside of their youth group or their family, that was the higher indicator than any other, whether they would stay within the church or not. And so it made me realize very quickly I need to connect these students to other disciplers, because I don't count. I'm just the youth pastor, right? And so he's just that guy. And so that, I think that's been one of the challenges, is making that connection, because there's so many people that are intimidated by teens, because teens are tough and they're, they can be a little tooty at times, and it's very different, and it's just different language. Man, if you haven't hung around youth in a while, and then you go to hang around and they just start throwing out language, and you're like, I don't think we're speaking the same language. It's wild, and so they get really intimidated. But those relationships are so vital. Whether that's you connect with them in the pew on a Sunday, just sitting beside them. I've got a friend of mine that actually the only reason he's still in church is because old Miss Lunette, she was an elderly lady, and I love her. She was great, super blunt, but sweet as could be. And she said, "Come here, honey, come sit right here. I got you a seat right here." And to this day, he sits in that spot. And cool. and Miss Lunette has went to be with the Lord, but and he stayed in, and he's told me, he goes, man, she's the reason I stayed, and she stayed in. So it's those kind of connections. And so I think all that, to answer your question, that's been part of the challenge, is connecting students with other people that love the Lord. I think when a student can see, hey, I can be that. If they look at Phil and go, I can be that in just a couple years. I can be where he's at, and it gives them a true role model and a tangible role model that's not through a screen or fictitious or it's real and tangible, and they see it regularly. So I think that's kind of a big deal. I think another challenge that's gotten worse is and I'm not saying smartphones are evil, so just say it on the front end, but the fact that there's never a break anymore for students. I didn't realize that, because as a student, the smartphone was had become a thing and was invented as I was coming out of high school, and so I didn't have that as a youth. I definitely didn't have a smartphone. That was too fancy, too rich for my blood, and so but because of that, almost every student has one. And the world is there. They don't leave it anymore at school. They don't have to keep a facade for school and then come home and now they kind of get a recentering or regrouping or family time or things like that. But even as they come home with family, they bring every bit of it. They are on call 24/7 to the culture that demands their attention. And so as things are going, and not only that, but media has changed. It's quick, it's fast, 7 seconds or less, and just boom, boom, boom. And so it's new, more, and more is hitting them constantly. And so, and I never want to say that youth have it harder than they've ever had it. I think that's a faulty statement. The devil has been working hard the whole time, and man, he gets you where you can. All these struggles aren't new struggles, but they're different. But I think part of the struggle is, man, students are inundated with so much. And I'm so sorry. So much all the time. no break. It's unrelenting, and so it is brutal that way. It's almost like if you expect, a workaholic to get better, but he'd be on call and constantly taking the phone calls. It's just it's those kind of things. So it's hard to break away from the wrong and the things that God's calling you away from if you're always in it and so much. So it takes just that much more discipline, I think. So I think that's another challenge. I would say, again, smartphones aren't evil, but it provides something different. Another great thing about smartphones though is there's a Bible with you at any given second of the day, which I remember having to chase mine down. It was always a struggle. Camps, the big thing was, if you left your Bible, you had to go do a really embarrassing thing on stage to go get it back. Yeah. And now that no one does that because it's on your phone. So, they always have access to questions and be able to find, seek out answers like I couldn't have when I was, it took go finding a desktop and making sure it had internet and getting on it. And so it's a little different. I'm not that old, but, it's a little different. I didn't have it in the palm of my hand, and they do. So that's an upside to smartphones in that same breath. But you never get away. It's a whole nother challenge as well. So those are just two, I think, that stick out to me that, even as a pastor that's been doing it for 11 years, it's trying to figure out how do I do that? How do I leverage this thing that's not innately evil or good? It is what it is, but how do we leverage that for the gospel, and how do we make that more of a thing? And so, just trying to figure that out. So it's a challenge. It's hard.
Yeah, and like I said, we could list. There's so many different challenges, but that's just ministry.
Yeah.
Ministry, is never. It's so funny. There's so many. And they're good. I'm not saying they're not good. There's books and articles and all these things on how to do this and how to grow youth ministry to this. And, there's just lots and lots of things. And they're good tools to use, and they can work from time to time. But ministry it's got to be flexible.
Oh, yeah.
There's so many challenges and hurdles that you have to jump through that maybe you're going to go through things that there's nothing written about it. Even though with the world that we live in, you would be surprised how many things that aren't actually on the internet. How do you do this?
It makes me so mad. I'm like, out of all the things there, and there's nothing. Great. Okay.
Yeah. So the youth of today, like you said, I love that you said it. It can be easy, and it's almost a cop out to say the youth. It's harder today than any other day because, like you said, the devil's been working since day one, not just on mature Christians, but on the youth and those that are just coming to the faith and those that are still seeking out the Lord and all those things. But things have changed when it comes to the way that just the things that the devil uses today.
Oh, yeah.
Just to... whether that's on the mental side or emotional or the list goes on and on. Just the devil is the author of confusion, deception and lies and all those things. So what do you feel like today? What do you feel like the kids today are having the most struggle with?
Yeah, it's one that is the same, I think, that's always had, but in a different flavor, is an identity issue, I think, as I'll boil it down to that, right? And that's always the issue, right? If you're outside of Christ, there's an identity issue. But I think even culturally, trying to figure out, what's good, what's not, and it's changing so fast even from them. I do think culture feels like it's speeding up a little bit with the advent of technology. It moves faster. But who you are, what are you okay with, and what group are you with, and to a degree that's always been the struggle. Every youth, we think back to any of our youth in our time, in high school, we're like, I definitely was a struggle, but even more so to like how I identify, not just specifically talking about sexual identity or things like that, but there's just
who I am.
Yeah, just it's so swirling, and I say different flavor because in that. This generation is more connected than any generation ever on this earth. Like, never has anyone had the opportunity to be so connected. It is wild. At any given point, I think I can't remember what that was. It's all I think on one hand, but you're 5 points of contact away from anybody on this earth at some point, right? And so because of Facebook, you can just anywhere, and so because of that, it's created this sense of loneliness. Even though we're the most connected generation, and the kids are more connected and are becoming more and more connected than they've ever been, they're more lonely than they've ever been. And that's recorded. That's an objective thing we found. And they're just, because of the identity struggle and worry and this idea of peer pressure, that as I'm talking to students, one of the current struggles I'm finding is that, man, they're so lonely because there's not depth.
Yeah.
And I talked to one student, and they said, man, I have best friends, and we talk all the time, but sometimes even when I'm in the room with them, I feel so lonely. And it's because, as I start talking to them, I'm like, man, what do you guys talk about? And, well, we talk about sports. Oh, okay, well, what else do you talk about? Do y'all ever talk about this? No. And I'll ask him, like, well, man, do you know your best friend? His best friend was like, had a girlfriend. And I'm like, well, what's her name? He goes, oh, I don't know. I'm like, dude. And like, at least know that, and that seems funny, but like the things that they don't know about each other, and it's not about just knowing facts, but this idea that everything is kept at arm's length and a distance, that you have to be so guarded because, again, you were exposed everywhere. Like if you say one wrong thing, you're viral. And not just say, but if you become one wrong thing, it is blasted a little bit more. It doesn't just go through the schoolyard train, but now it's across multiple schools because they're so connected. That rap spreads further, and so there just seems to be this sense of just reservation and unwillingness to live life with people in such a way that you could live life with arms around people and help with a burden. And so things weigh heavy, and pressures are always there. And so when you don't have that peer support, it's tough. And so because there's just this loneliness, this deep loneliness that drives students to the things that they don't need, toxic relationships, toxic, friendships, things like that, because they're craving that which they don't have. And so, and outside the gospel, that problem's just made worse. Yeah. And so there's no hope, and it's rough. And I think it blows my mind that we start wondering why suicide is rising. Yeah. Man, outside of this ever increasing loneliness, you add a lack of hope in the gospel on top of that, and man, that's tough. I don't know how people can do it, and so it's a tough thing. So I know I think some of it, but also fighting this, how to live. And again, same thing. I think every generation has, just takes a slight new flavor, but this culture versus biblical truth. We're in America, we have, in the past 10 years, it's made that shift, I think, more firmly. But no one's trying to play church as much anymore. And there are those that do it, right? But it's not predominant anymore. We're not trying to fake Christianity as much. I have most of my students that aren't Christians, for the most part, they'll just tell you. Oh, yeah. No, I'm not. And we're not playing the games anymore like that. And so we're in a post-Christian culture. America is not a Christian nation. They just aren't. And I know that offends some people and it makes some people mad. But I'm just talking to the people. I'm there. I'm on college campuses regularly, talking to college students. I am with youth constantly. I talk to young adults constantly. I get to talk to not just young adults, but full-grown adults. Yeah. And that's what I have just found to be oh so true. And when you look around, I think it becomes evident. And so because of that, it's just, when you ask someone to step out in faith, it feels like a harder step because it feels more alone. And they're already fighting this feeling of loneliness. And so, you're asking them to do what no one else is doing. And, asking them to not do what everyone else is doing. And it's just brutal. And so this ever fighting battle is, the culture versus biblical truth. What everyone else is doing, is it okay? This, and the other. And so I think that's, one that's super hard. I know for, me in my context, and it's really, I know it's not just mine, it's everywhere, but, like vapes is an example. That's one that came on the rise, and it's just so bad. It's so terrible. And like it drives me up the wall, right? Yeah. And if for nothing else, it's illegal for minors. And so not to count, all the health problems with it, but, everyone's doing it. And I have some of these students that, they're really trying to love the Lord. And that's like a no issue to them. And they partake. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing? And I don't understand. Like everyone, over 70% of the school population at the school will have one upon them. And so it's just, it's hard when you feel that alone. And the feeling of persecution grows when the numbers start feeling that lopsided.
Yeah,
and so that's just one example. But I know that's been a fight and a conversation I'm having often, is this feeling of loneliness and putting rubber to the road to your faith and doing really hard things. And I'm not saying it's hard. It's hard to go against what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, and especially at that age. Because like you said, one of the hard things that students are going through, which is this sense of belonging or identity, having real deep relationships with people. And if that's what you're longing for, it's harder to go against the grain when it's gonna make it feel like that's even worse now, because again, maybe you're only the 20% that's not doing these things. Or maybe even taking a stand on those things and saying those, because that's a whole different level, right?
That's another step.
Not doing something, that's great, but then making a stand and saying, no, this is wrong for all people to do, and publicly making that statement when you have to, because at times, a lot of times you do have to make that statement.
Yeah, you got to draw a line.
When you're presented with something, and now as a high schooler, now you have to draw that line. There's the wheels are spinning. Like, can I get away with this?
Yeah.
How can I say this? And the list goes on and on. So with these hard things that you are seeing, not just because it's not just a Valdosta issue, it's across the country and across the world, with lots of things. And every student is different. Every student will struggle with different things. Every adult struggles with different things. Which makes it very not difficult, but hard as in youth ministry to navigate, because you're there to minister to these kids. You have to be very open and flexible, because you're going to hear all types of stories from all types of different students.
So many,
and sometimes very tough and tragic stories that can break your heart. And that weighs on a youth pastor. It weighs on those that volunteer in youth ministry.
Absolutely. I don't think people realize how much, I'm not gonna go and be dramatic, Mike. These kids are like obviously parents have a love for their kids, but I also have a love for these kids. Like I have shed tears for these kids, and not just over the most tragic things, but things that I know, man, the thing that has just happened to them or has happened because of them. It breaks my heart, and I feel deeply, and youth leaders do. So, man, pray for y'all. Pray for your youth leaders. Pray for your youth pastors, because man, in ways they carry it. You can't just not.
Yeah.
You if you're doing it right, man, you're gonna love these students, and what hurts them hurts you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is the last question that I'll ask you, because I think it is the most important. Is how do you think that we can reach the kids in America today?
Yeah, I think for me, I'd say truth over relevance. I think that everyone feels an image game of youth, and the whole reason we have a subsection of ministry called youth instead of just having one big church service is because we feel like there needs to be some sense of relevance to connect or things like that. And I'm gonna just tell you, I know for me, man, one of my best, even to date, 11 years of ministry, working with youth, one of the best ever, and some of the best ever workers that I've ever had and volunteers are not young. They've always, for a lot of my ministry, most people are older than me, but they were in their 60s, and they connected so well with these students, not because they knew what the slang was. They didn't know about skibbity. They didn't know nothing like that. They had no idea. And in fact, it drove them nuts. But man, they were just honest and real, and they just lived their life with the student and for real. And so I think we got to realize that, there's some times where it's fun and it's good to be relevant and being aware of things, but man, we have to have truth over relevance. And in no way should truth ever be softened or hindered for the sake of irrelevance, for the sake of relevance. And so I say that to say I think most of the response I've had with some of my students, because I work with a lot of literally a lot of these kids that I work with have been kicked out of other churches, and so they come to me, and so I get a lot of the fun students. I'm really honest with them. I think I was at a camp one time and I was talking to a student. Another pastor heard me and he came over and said, "Dude, you can't talk to students like that." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, I was like, oh, that was a little harsh. That was so much. I'm like, no. You know what I'm saying? Like, I know this student. Like, we have that relationship. First off, I always want to have a relationship with these students. But second, like, someone has to love them enough to be honest. I wasn't, it's not about yelling. I'm not talking about that. You don't need to be able to do that. If you can't do it without yelling, maybe you don't need to do it, kind of thing. There's exceptions. Sometimes you need to yell. But, like, don't jump off that. But just being really honest and calling it as it is. And it's super hard because, students will try and gaslight you. Man, I've had students make me think I'm just crazy. Because they'll just, man, I've got them on camera and they're like, nah, man. And they'll stick with it. I'm like, am I crazy? I don't know. But you just got to be really honest. And it's not just honesty, right? You can be a honest, blunt, and still be a butthead, and still be in sin, right? And I think I've had this conversation with a lot of other young ministers in the faith that you can be blunt and honest and still be in sin, and because there's a heart behind it as well, right? What is the motivation? And so I know for me, I love my students, and out of that love, and because I know what God's done in my life and how He's changed the whole trajectory of my life, man, I want that for them, and because of that, I'm going to talk to them about this real issue. Right, whether I've been struggled with it or not, and I think that's another thing that we might be able to help with students is kind of this phrase that I think God put on my heart, but realizes, man, we don't get to pick our sin, or we don't get to pick our struggle, but that doesn't change the call to struggle, and so we are to struggle through it, not just let it win, right? And another phrase I tell students all the time is the difficulty of a situation doesn't change the necessity of it. And so those are the kind of conversations and the kind of attitude we, I think, need to have with these students, because everyone else is being fake. Everything they see all day is a facade. Everything, right? And I think TikTok was going down, and all of a sudden all the influencers were revealing all their deep, dark secrets, and then surprise, and it's really awkward and for a lot of these guys. And so everything is just faked, and they're so busy catering their own fake lives, for so much, and that's just the norm. And and everyone always has, right? Keeping up with the Joneses is a saying that's around forever. But in every avenue of our life now, again, you're never off call, you're never away, you're always, always there. But we just got to be honest and present honesty. Have honest conversations. Talk about the real things, right? I think one topic that just freaks people out is things like sex. I'm gonna just tell you, if they're in middle school and high school, they're, if not a part of those conversations, they're hearing those conversations. Guaranteed. That's just how it is, right? And no matter how precious we think Johnny is, Johnny's hearing it. Yeah. And so because of that, we need to step in and have loving, honest conversations about it. They will be informed, but will they get honest biblical information and truth? All right? They don't know what they're talking about. So it'd be good to have someone that actually has wisdom in the matter. They give maybe some truth, and just not, we got to quit being so worried about how we look, and which I think is something I gave up on real quick, and I had students really mess with me about it. They were like, yeah, a lot of people that come here think you're a little weird. I'm like, I mean, I had fun with you guys, but I don't know about weird. And they go, what's the way you dress? You're always wearing flannel. I'm like, what? Like, yeah, man, you're always wearing flannel. And I'm like, it's because it's effective, okay? Yeah. I quit caring about what I look like. And but I say that they become to respect that. They start, if you're honest and vulnerable and open with them, they know that there's some safety in their ability to reciprocate that. Yeah. And so anyway, I think that's one of the things that so often, as I talk to other youth pastors at other churches, and it's small churches, and they're really trying to build one up, and they're trying to do the hype game, and I'm like, be careful. What you build your base on, you'll live and die by that, right? And so if you're all about being hopping and cool and relevant, the moment you're not, so is the crowd. Yeah. But those that you've reached with the truth, they stay, because they're not there for whatever else you had going on in the smoke and mirrors. They're there for the truth. Yeah. And as you're true with them about your very life, they also see that the gospel must be true too, if that's what's guiding you. And so it opens the door for that. I think another thing is, kind of in the same vein, is structure over fun. And I gotta have hard lines on some things, right? I have, and it breaks my heart. There's been students I had to send home. It's like, man, I'll see you in 6 months. And I had to send them home. And, for the good of everyone, that's what was needed, man. There's physical pain being had, right? And so, there has to be hard structure. And then, so when they come, or as you go to them, they know that there's safety, right? They might not like it. To a degree, no one loves extra structure. No one loves extra rules. Every additional rule, the love for you drops. And so I kept mine to 10. See what we did with that. But just when they get there, have some structure and consistency. So many students are going through so much. There's no one evades life without trauma, right? And I think that's a new cultural word we're throwing around a lot more now. And when I hear students say it, I'm like, that's not what that means. That's not trauma, dude. You just had a bad day. That's not trauma. And I'm working with other students. I'm like, that's trauma. That's capital T trauma right there. That's some rough stuff. But we gotta have a place and the ability to have conversations with them, a structure set to where we don't make it worse, and they can come and they know that we can handle it. We got to be firm, but gracious. There's a balance. I think that's the struggle of all youth ministry, is the balance of all these different attributes, right? How stern and do we reflect God's character and His justice and His truth, but also His graciousness and His mercy, and in what ways, right? Do you yell at them just because they ran through the hallway and kick them out, or do you let them get away with the thing because we don't want to send them home because we want them to hear the gospel, and so there's this balance, and so just in all things, I think youth ministry, that's one of the things I think we lose sight of at times is relevance is great, but truth is superior, and there's a balance. And man, God is a just God, but He's also a gracious God. And so we have to know when to exercise those. And so we have to seek God in those matters. So I think, as we start trying to reach more students, kind of realizing that, and we ain't got all the answers. I think that's nothing that intimidates so many people to reach out to students, is it cannot be the youth pastor. I'm going to just tell you, I'm just 32, and so I'm 32, but 32-year-old guy walking up on a high school campus like, hey man, you want to come to church? Come hop in. Really creepy. Doesn't go well. In fact, it's not a great strategy. I don't recommend it. But man, getting other people as they go through the community and they're living their lives, like, hey man, there's an awesome youth group down the road, or hey, our church has a great youth group, you should come, or even students realizing, like, go in and peers bringing them. We can't be the only ones reaching out. It can't be just the youth pastor. In fact, for all churches, it never can be just the pastor. That's not healthy. But also, you don't have to be an expert on it to invite a student to come or to help out with youth ministry. And help your brothers out. They need some help. They will never, if you ever come across a youth pastor that tells you, no, I'm good, I've got all the help I need, they're delusional and you should check them into a hospital. There's always room for more people to come and help and be a part of that process. But, man, you don't have to be an expert in it. If we're going to reach more youth, we got to quit acting like we got to wait until we're ready to be able to help out. To some degrees, yes, there's some things, right? You need to be a Christian, right? If you're going to teach people about the gospel, you need to know the gospel, right? So wait for that part. But past that, that's fine. You don't have to understand all the things about sexual identity to be able to start having those conversations. Sometimes we just need to know what we know, and God loves you, and He made you a specific way, and He did it for your good. And start teaching the students that the 10 Commandments weren't for God's good. They're all for our good. Right? Don't go around murdering people. God's not dying because you're murdering someone. We are. And so, lies hurt us. And so things like that. And so starting to realize that God's heart behind it, and that God loves them. That's really good. You know that? You're a great candidate for ministry and youth ministry. And you're a great candidate to have conversation with youth. They just need someone real and honest and that knows the Lord. Yeah,
absolutely. If you could just maybe just give a few words of encouragement for those maybe that are just starting youth ministry, or even those that have been in youth ministry for 11 years. Maybe you need to encourage yourself in a few words.
Oh, always. Oh, man. There's so many nights I go home and I don't know if I should keep doing this. That was terrible. And that's all. Anyone in ministry needs encouragement. But I would encourage is, there's a process. Man, some things work, some things don't. But don't forget the calling. And if God called you, He'll equip you. Yeah. And it might not be what you thought at all. When I first started youth ministry, God only trusted me with 2 souls. That's it. That's all I got. He goes, that's all I could trust you with. Yeah. And so, but now things have changed, and God has developed me. There's a process to it. Just love the Lord. Seek after Him. No matter how hard a day was, always fall back on what you know for sure, that God called you to this. And He'll equip you to it. And don't get so far ahead of yourself and thinking that you had it figured out, or that you're going to figure it out, or you've got the right structure or plan, or, well, I heard this Garrett Stout guy, he had this model. I'm going to do it, so it's going to save our youth ministry. Don't do that. Okay, just hold tight. It might be great, but pray through that. But just remember your calling. Fall back on that at the end of the day. And don't let things like numbers get in the way. Yeah. Man, some of the best conversations I ever had was when my group was so small. I was so discouraged. I'm like, oh no, I'm going to ruin this youth group. And man, just life-changing, just trajectory-changing stuff happened in those moments, and it was so sweet, right? And then in the moments of 60, great things happened. Or I think we were up to 85 at one point, and that was great. Awesome, great things happened then too. Just don't get so caught up on those things. Don't so get caught up on how smart you are or how structured you can get things. Yeah. Man, just preach Jesus and the cross, right? And so it was good enough for Paul. It's good enough for me. And things will follow through. Just live your life before them. Be honest. Don't get ahead of yourself. Don't make yourself more than you are, and don't sell yourself short. You are a child of God that has a calling. So live in that calling. Remember who you are. I think that's encouraging, at least for me. My wife's always having to hit me over the head with those sometimes and remind me. But it's hard. That's just the name of the game. Not just youth ministry. All ministry is hard, and that's why God had to call you to it. So,
so that concludes our episode for this week. Thanks, Garrett, for joining me today and sharing just your heart for youth ministry and a little bit of wisdom. For sure.
I don't know about that. But
so, again, and thank you for your team, you and Creston, just for being faithful and continuing to come to little old Huntington and share your talents and your gifts and your muscle and your backs and all, everything you got. We really do appreciate the friendship that we've made over these years. So, and I'll be excited to see how it turns out years and years down the road. So if you like this episode, go ahead and like and subscribe. Share with us maybe just some moments and stories you've had in youth ministry. That would be great for us to see here. And as always, thank you for listening to New Life Podcast.